Okay, we're continuing with our rebuilding of the D-type Overdrive, and you're looking right now at the planet gear carrier with the planet gears in it. So there's something that's kind of important here. I'm going to zoom in and show you. There is a little dot on the side of the carrier, and there is a corresponding dot right here that you can see on the gear teeth. And you want to make sure that's lined up. So for all three, there it is right there. There. So you want the dots to line up, and that's going to help you because the next step is to get your sun gear and slot it in, which isn't, there we go, isn't going to be the easiest thing. Double check that all the marks still line up after you get the gear in. That one does, that one does. Yeah, we're looking good. Okay. This is ready to go into position, and it should slot in because the gears are lined up appropriately. Okay, here we are back at the annulus and the housing, and before you go any further, there's our unidirectional clutch. You want to make sure it's actually unidirectional. So you can do this with just a finger on the inside. If you have a main shaft, you can do it too, but you want to make sure it'll turn one way and not the other, hence unidirectional. If it does that and it operates smoothly, you're good to keep going. We just put our sun gear in the planetary gears in the carrier, and next you want to slot that in. Make sure that operates smoothly. And just like with our other parts, not a terrible idea to put some oil in. In older versions of the Overdrive, 30 weight, just standard 30 weight oil is what they use to run it. So it's actually got a similar viscosity to gear oil that is recommended for these. I would upgrade to Redline MT90 is what I use. It works in any Overdrive that's going to be in any of the cars that I drive anyway. It's fantastic fluid. It kind of holds up and is more appropriate for gears. I know a lot of the manuals say 30 weight oil, but truthfully those manuals have then been superseded by later versions of those manuals that say gear oil. So MT90 is what I use. You don't have to, but a GL4 fluid will be what you're looking for. That's what you want in there. So, but 30 weight oil for assembly purposes, perfectly fine. It'll mix in fine with the oil. You're probably going to do some maintenance and change it soon anyway. So anyway, that's that. Now we can keep moving forward. Oh, if you need to, you can take out the sun gear at this point, because the planetary gears are going to be held in place because they're meshing with the annulus, and so you'll be able to put this right back in. Not super easily, but there you go. You'll be able to slot this right back in, and it'll still line up where it's supposed to be. So now set this aside someplace clean. Okay, now we've got our sliding clutch assembly bearing carrier. So what we're going to do is we're going to press in a new bearing into the housing, and then we need to get the sliding member through the bearing. We can do this with a press. It's a little tricky because I don't want to press really too hard on this. I don't want to take a risk of damaging the clutch surface. So you can either use like a piece on the outside to kind of hold everything flat and then press it through that way. Or what I'm going to do is just use a puller, and I'm going to kind of get it through the center of here and pull these two pieces together just by compressing them. So I'll show you that. But first, let's get this pressed in. Okay, here's the puller that we're going to be using. Just kind of roughly how we want it to go. to center. The first thing you want is that it's latched on. And then we get this bit set up. Feels like it's in. Double check there's a slot there. That's where a circlip goes. It's going to kind of hold everything in place. And as long as you have that, loosen it. Snap ring in place. Go. If you remember, the sun gear goes in. Well, not if you remember, it goes in whether you remember or not. And there is a circlip here as well. Sun gear is in. That's the clutch assembly finished. The sliding member, I should say. There's multiple clutches. Okay, the planetary gears will already fit around the sun gear, you know that. So now you get the whole housing in. Just a little bit of twisting, that should go in. There we go. Next is your retainer plate and clutch springs. Okay, here's where a sealant actually gets used, because there isn't a gasket for this spot. But just remember the rule, you don't want to don't glob on sealant. It's just poor practice in general. Get enough on that it does its job, and that's it. Wipe off any excess fluid first, and then you want to assemble the pieces. Brake ring goes on this way. There's a flat spot on the side, and make sure the holes line up at the top and bottom. That's how the oil flows through. Alright, so you want to line up the holes. That's for the sliding member coming through here, and then you kind of want to get the overdrive halves lined up. But before you tighten everything down, get your main shaft. I've replaced the main shaft, so it's easy. This is one reason, by the way, why you might want to rebuild the overdrive before the gearbox, or in the middle of. But you want to put the main shaft in so that it's in the splines, and then you want to make sure that you can get it in both sets of splines. Because if you remember, there's a set of splines in the planetary gears and also in the sun gear. and they will have to line up or this will not go together. So before you put pressure on it, make sure that you keep it just far enough apart to be able to do that. There's your sets of splines. So you want to make sure that those line up and that it's the same all the way down. We're getting close to putting these pistons back in, but before we do, there's an O-ring on here that we're going to change out. You'll notice there's a little bit of wear on the side of the pistons from sliding back and forth, but at the same time, the only part that's really important is that it seals at that O-ring. So that's something that we're going to change out. Making sure that we find the easiest way to stab our fingers while we're doing it. There we go. The type of material that you want to use for the O-rings is important. These are nitrile O-rings, which have a good resistance to petroleum products. You don't want to use just straight ordinary rubber. It's not going to seal. You want to fit the pistons back in after you get the O-rings on. Make sure that you coat them in oil so they slide in easily. Remember that you have these tabs that you need to put back before you put back the nuts. And then we're going to bend it back on to keep these from coming undone. Make sure there's no loose bits on it. And you want them to be tight enough that they're not falling off, but at the same time, especially if you're reusing an old part, which I always recommend just getting a new one anyway, but you don't want to take a chance that you're going to get little metal fragments. So don't pull it back apart, because then you're just metal fatiguing, but make sure that the parts aren't loose and about to break off. That'll keep the nut from undoing itself, and will also keep metal bits from damaging your overdrive. Okay, next we put the oil pump back in. Now remember, you didn't have to take this out necessarily the first time, but we did. So bolt, same way that you got it out. You want to thread in a bolt to get it back in, because that way we're going to press against it when we insert it back into its home there, but we're not going to take a risk of damaging the housing. There's a little slot that goes towards the back, and you only want to push it far enough to get the grub screw through there. So make sure that it's lined up. Make sure there's nothing in the way. And then remember that the other side of the oil pump, there's a flat bit that goes towards the back. Need that in first. Okay, and then what we're going to do is set it up like this so that it's held and then push down. If you're careful about it, you can use a hammer. Just make sure that you keep an eye down this hole. You want to know when you've pressed far enough. And as you're pressing it in, you want to make sure that the oil pump can still ride up and down. Done with the bolts. The oil pump is pressed in the correct amount. So you can see that'll move up and down. And then we can reassemble the rest in here. Okay. Next, you remember this piece. Tool we made to get it in, or out rather, we'll also tighten it back in. Do not forget the ball. Spring. And finally the plug. This is just a 3/8 inch drive impact ratchet, so there we go.